Yeah, great. Oh, well, afternoon, everyone. So thank you all for coming to this Beyond a Joke session. I believe the first one on the programme on the impact of AI in social media and comedy. So my name is Dr. Claire Sedgwick. I'm a researcher in comedy and recently finished a project looking at comedy within the East Midlands. Lived in Leicester for a long time before moving back up north, so it's always a real pleasure to be able to come and speak at things like this. And I'm joined today by Michael Day, who's from Equity Union. So we're going to talk a little bit today about AI, why it matters, and specifically why it matters within the context of comedy. So the aim will be that I'll spend about 15-20 minutes with a kind of really kind of broad overview of the issues, and then Michael will talk specifically about some of the work that Equity's doing to kind of support performers to make sure that their rights are being protected, especially their kind of intellectual property rights in the wake of AI. So I am not a computer scientist, I'm a cultural studies person, so I thought this was quite a handy definition of AI that kind of that I could understand, so I'm hoping that it's relatively straightforward. So it was a term that was coined by Emeritus Stanford Professor John McCarthy in 1955. It was defined by him as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. Much research has human programmed machines to behave in a clever way, like playing chess, but today we emphasise machines that can learn, or at least somewhat like humans beings do. So I think in the past couple of years we've seen this real kind of increase in AI being used across the globe. I mean, I think many of us will have tried to use things like ChatGPT. I think any of us that are teachers or lecturers will know that it's become an increased challenge within those settings as well, because it's just easier for AI to create things which look like it's been written by a human. And that becomes a challenge within the context of the entertainment industry, because obviously, historically, those things have been written by humans. So it's been developed in ways that can manipulate video and voices. So we see things like deep fake. And that technology is developed to the extent in which often it's quite indistinguishable whether or not something is being said by that person or whether it's a kind of manipulation. And again, as we'll see, that becomes an issue in terms of things like film and television, because if your likeness can be used by AI, becomes questions about, well, what's your role as a performer, and what's your rights around your image. And arguably for comedy, the ability for AI to write whole routines is something that needs to be considered. So ChatGPT, in particular, if you ask it a question like, write this, write that, it will come up with something that is obviously not perfect, but it's kind of a decent starting point. And obviously, comedy is also a performance, so it's not going to perform the show. But again, I think it's something to consider. It's something that's important to bear in mind. And there's also been discussions around the use of existing intellectual property being used as a training data for AI. So if it, obviously AI is trained in order to be able to create things. And so Lees argues that establishing a values-based system for how AI can change performers' images and identities is a fundamental issue for the film and TV industries. And I think for comedy, this idea of kind of what kind of information is kind of fed into AI programs is important as well. So a bit of context, and Michael will go into this a little bit as well from the trade union perspective. So obviously we've had two big strikes in the US in 2023. So we had the writers' strike, which wasn't just about AI. It's fair to say there were all sorts of issues around payment, but the settlement agreement from the writers' strike included an AI agreement that stipulated AI can't be used to write or rewrite any scripts or treatments, ensures that studios will disclose if any material given to writers is AI generated, and protects writers from having their scripts used to train AI without their say-so. Provisions in the contract also stipulate that script scribes can use AI for themselves. So again, it kind of comes back to this idea of ownership, who owns the kind of content that's being used. And that is also an important thing to consider within comedy as well, because obviously people write kind of for themselves, and they don't necessarily expect that work to be used in other contexts. And then the actors' strike, quite similar. A lot of issues around likeness, so concerns around the use of AI and likeness. So background actors in particular, concerns about their image being used to kind of create extras, so that they may be hired once and then they're never needed again because their image is just used in future projects. And so Dalton says, studios want to be able to scan a background performer's image, pay them for half a day's labour, and then use an individual's likeness for any purpose forever without their consent. Studios also want to be able to make changes to a principal performer's dialogue and even create new scenes without informed consent. And studios want to be able to use someone's images, likenesses and performances to train new generative AI systems without consent or compensation. So again, we're getting to this stage where you don't actually need potentially you don't need the human actor to kind of change scenes. And then there are questions around creativity and around kind of consent in that. Is to if someone's kind of acted a scene and then it's been manipulated, is that being manipulated in a way that they're comfortable with? We might think about how that could become an even more moral grey area where we think about things, like sex scenes, for example, where someone is maybe being manipulated in a way that they have not consented to. So I think that is something that is increasingly important for the whole industry. But as I said, for comedy in particular, because often the kind of written word is central to the comedian's act. The second thing that I'll just briefly touch on is the idea of social media and comedy as well, which is slightly different from AI. It's not the same thing, but I think is important to consider. So in the past few years, we've seen increasingly social media being used to share clips of stand-up, as well as sketches and clips from podcasts. And TikTok in particular has been a vehicle for this, with original comedy, things like sketches being shared, as well as kind of scenes from stand-up shows, often kind of clips of a joke that is taken out of a whole show. And some TikTok comedy creators have also made the move the other way as well, and have done stand-up as well. So in Edinburgh last year, there was a few creators that started off in TikTok, especially during the pandemic, and then had gone on to actually perform live shows in Edinburgh. And then, as I said, established comedians also use social media as a way to engage with audiences. So Friedlander says that we're in a new age of comedy thanks to the diversification by bricks and mortar clubs and social media, which has levelled the playing field for talent. There is not, however, a direct correlation to a comedian's viral success online and that person's ability to land a spot on a comedy club's main stage. So I think we have to also question this idea that becoming viral online is going to automatically lead to kind of fame and riches, because that is often not the case. And then, as we'll show in a little bit, there's often actually not a lot of money in kind of doing well on social media, contrary to the idea that people are going to kind of go viral and make millions. So TikTok in particular had something until quite recently which was called the Creator Fund, which is now replaced by something that's got quite a similar name called the Creativity Programme. And they describe it as this. So if creative is an individual, they do say here legal resident of the United States, but they did also include some other countries, including the UK, within the fund as well. The account is active and in good standing and compliance with the policies, and has at least 10,000 authentic followers and at least 100,000 authentic total views in the last 30 days. So they can apply to the programme. The idea is that after a certain amount of views, they get some money from TikTok. But there has been some kind of quite strong critiques of the creator programme and of TikTok itself, especially around issues of censorship, which obviously in the context of comedy becomes increasingly important because, there's often been discussions around what a comedian can or can't say, and then when you add TikTok onto that, it becomes a kind of an extra layer to that. And then Newman cites someone that's, many say the Creator Funds pay such small amounts of money compared to YouTube that in most cases it's not worth their time. So there is also questions of whether the revenue that's being made is enough to justify the amount of money that, the amount of time that people are spending to kind of generate views on something like TikTok. And then obviously this leads to an increased audience on social media compared to in comedy clubs. Dynel and Chovanec say that numerous technology mediated forms of interpersonal communication, not only normative on various social media, so Facebook, TikTok, etc., but also affect the way traditional media content is received. New spaces are provided where users can either react to the traditional media content or assume the role of producers, being turned from passive recipients of traditional media artifacts to active co-creators of new media content. So obviously there is this kind of dialogue within social media that doesn't necessarily exist in kind of physical spaces. So you are potentially able to reach audiences that are less likely to attend live comedy. So for example, there might be accessibility reasons that people don't attend. There might be reasons such as, the perennial fear that you're going to get picked on for being in the front row, those kind of things. But almost there is also the potential for kind of abusive comments that might impact kind of marginalised comedians the most. And then on top of that, there is also this challenge of what we might describe as algorithmic bias or restrictions on content. So we often see the kind of the algorithm is this kind of apolitical thing that, you just see what you want, what you like. But obviously there are extents in which that is, the algorithm is created by people and people have biases. So there is there is questions about who is kind of viewed and which kind of content is promoted and which content might be kind of the word's often used as shadow banned, for example, so which content is kind of not viewed and is kind of is marginalised. So Harris says that one of the most common challenges experienced by most of the participants in their research, which was looking at African American content creators, was content moderation, in particular the hypersensitive nature of content moderation systems on TikTok. So that was a challenge as a piece to suppress, review more closely or frequently remove content from the black creators in their study. Several creators discussed the hypersensitive nature of the TikTok content moderation system that seemed to remove videos for erroneous violation. And again, within the context of comedy, where often people are, provocative, sometimes controversial, it's something to consider as well as is certain kinds of comedy going to be more or less likely to kind of be allowed to flourish in these systems. And then secondly, another important element to think about in this, both in terms of AI but also in terms of social media, is intellectual property. So obviously, if you share your joke on social media, to what extent do you keep the ownership of that joke once it's been shared kind of around kind of many different people. So Pham, who was a legal scholar, talks about how members outside the traditional stand-up comedy community are now equipped with an internet connection. So talks about things like joke aggregators and regular individual users and how they have the ability to disseminate jokes widely on social media. And this poses a threat to the creation and dissemination of jokes, which in turn undermines the viability of the stand-up comedy industry. This harm can include harm to the comedian's reputation and loss of the use of the affected joke. A joke is generally abandoned by a comedian as soon as a joke theft occurs because it's an injury to your reputation and originality key, and a comedian cannot be risked being perceived as a joke thief. So if you post something on social media and then it gets used by one of these aggregator sites, it might be shared and it might be taken out of the context of you saying it into the context of someone else saying it, and then it becomes harder for you to kind of challenge it and say that it was your content originally. And where historically I think there's often been a kind of honour system within comedy, so people have kind of challenged joke thieves, and that's been a way to kind of police the system. Obviously, joke aggregator sites don't care whether or not they're kind of blacklisted by the comedy because they're, because they're not involved in it in the first place. They're kind of, the reason they're there is to kind of create views and generate more kind of likes and follows. So, as I said, Gamblin talks about this idea of self-help mechanisms that have arguably been used to prevent joke stealing, but this, I would argue, is less effective within the context of social media accounts and joke aggregators in particular, because it's just less likely that you're going to be able to convince someone in those accounts that they shouldn't be doing this. And then on TikTok in particular, I think this is something to consider, because often the system has the ability to take someone else's audio and then you produce a video based on it on top of it. So there's been examples of comedians that have said that they've had whole jokes and routines where they've found that the joke has reappeared on TikTok with their speech, so with their voice, but it's been lip synced by someone else and they're not getting credited for it. So there is kind of quite murky questions of credit within the context of TikTok where people can take that kind of content quite easily, whilst also recognising the capacity for it to create some quite creative uses of kind of the technology. But I think it's a murky world at best. So yeah, that's it from me. So we'll listen to Michael and then we'll have a discussion and then some chance for people to ask questions. But I just thought I'd give a bit of an overview of the kind of the context, and then we'll hear from Michael about what equity in particular can do to support performers in the industry.
Can you set me up on that? Is that working?
Yeah, so whenever you're ready.
Right, thanks very much, Claire. So my name is Michael Day, and I'm the official at Equity that deals with live performance and specifically comedy, circus, that sort of thing. And the work on AI is being led by our recorded media department, but nonetheless we all have to have a knowledge of it because it affects all areas. Okay, so we did a presentation like this similar in Edinburgh last year. So some of the slides here overlap with Claire's presentation, so I'll skip past those. I think you probably know what AI is by so far, but I'll carry on anyway. It's the first one. So this is what we're going to be covering, as I said, I'm going to skip by some of these. Claire's covered how it's being used in the entertainment industries, but some of the potential opportunities and concerns, there's some things there that we haven't mentioned specifically, and what the union is doing to protect equity members and how comedians particularly can protect themselves, and also if people want to get involved with our campaigns. So the definition of AI, well, firstly, there isn't an official definition at all. This is the one, the technology with the ability to perform tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence. That is the definition that the British government are using. So it's a bit shorter than the one Claire said, but it's the one we're working to anyway. So that's what it is basically, using machine to do intelligent tasks. And generative AI is what we're talking about here. It can be narrow or it can be general purpose. General purpose is where it takes lots and lots and lots of content from everywhere and uses it to create new content. So Adobe Photoshop is an example, just if you're editing a still image. Say if you've got something in the foreground you want to get rid of, it uses what's in the background to cover up the thing in the foreground. But I mean, that can be used for all sorts of video purposes as well, that same technology. So performance cloning is one of the things that performers are most concerned about when something's recorded and used for something else. Can be used positively, can be something you want to happen, or it can be used negatively, which we'll come on to. So some of the positive applications are text-to-voice, image-to-voice translation. They're just things that the industry is using to, synchronize text and images, getting machines to read things in a particular voice and synchronize them with the actions of the person on screen. Creating interactive digital humans. So this has become more common these days, and it is actually work that members do. For example, they go into a studio, they get cloned, and then those digital avatars are used. I think there's a company called Synthesia that record those, and for £23 a month, your company can use those things for its own purposes. I'll come on to, manipulating existing identities, deep fakes. They have the most potential to be used negatively as well. Things like showing somebody doing something that they never did or said something that they never said. Apparently 96% of deep fakes are used in pornography, which is not a good thing, is it? Okay, so the good news really is about in comedy is it's not a particular imminent threat to comedy, because Claire also said this as well, it's very simple in what it can do at the moment. So doing jokes and puns it can do, but can't interpret sarcasm and things like that. It takes jokes and things a bit literally, but things are getting better. But as it said, humour is not a priority use of AI particularly. There's much more useful things to do with it at the moment and try to take the work away from comedians. So the concerns then, I mean, the obvious concern is job displacement. So this is like robots taking on jobs effectively. So that was a concern. We did a survey of members on this, and I think 63% roughly were worried about, you know, robots taking their jobs. And if you take that to the people doing voiceover work, it was 93% of people were worried about that. Creative output, you kind of lose control of that. So it was about, you know, generating new stuff from old. Deep fakes, potential for harmful content, as I said about, you know, being used for things that aren't good. Poor quality contracts. So, I mean, Equity does have contracts with the major broadcasters and employers in television, film, etc. But there's lots of smaller companies out there, and the contracts that we've seen, some of them are particularly bad, you know, like £300, and they take all the intellectual property of that performance to use for anything forever, and you just get that £300. The backdoor consent is one of those things where somebody might have done some work in the past that's been used for a recorded product, and that's maybe gone to a third party who've interpreted that contract to mean that they can use that work for anything they want to do with it, including using it for AI and things that were never intended by that contract. And you know, we're often having to challenge those for people that have come to us and said their performance has been used for something they never planned it to be. Intellectual property infringement is, you know, when they've taken your performance from somewhere else and used it for their own use without your consent. We have to challenge some of them can be challenged on data protection grounds because you could be identified from that. But there isn't a specific legislation about AI at the moment, so we have to challenge it on the legislation we've got. The lack of transparency is, you know, typical in contracts where the engager is trying to get rights. They're deliberately vague. They don't even know what they're going to use the performance for sometimes. They take the recording, they'll give you a very vague contract, and then the performance could end up being used for anything else that wasn't intended or thought of at the time, certainly something you hadn't consented to. So as I said, with the UK law, it is quite kind of weak on this sort of stuff at the moment, and the government are not wanting to legislate on AI. They're wanting the UK to become a sort of a global superpower of AI, and they're really kind of on the sides of the tech companies at the moment and not wanting to make any restrictions. So it's not their priority to sort of clamp down on the bad actors on this. So the opportunities, so there are some income opportunities. As I said, with those companies that want to record you and use your performance using AI for things, so there is a little bit of money in that. The increased accessibility may help performers with disabilities, for example, to be able to do things they couldn't do before. Safety benefits, well, you know, stunt performers do very, very dangerous stuff now to look really good, but they could do safer things, and with AI could be made to look just as good. Production quality could improve, and yeah, there could be some general new work out there because of this. So we started our campaign in 2022 because we could really see that things were developing in the industry, and it's good that we did manage to have a high level of engagement from members who were concerned about this, so the campaign was very good. Part of the UK law, I don't know how well people know copyright law. I'll assume you know a bit, but there are some exemptions to copyright for sort of genuine uses for things like education, you know, comment and review and things like that. but the government wanted to create a sort of an exemption to allow companies to basically take any work that was in copyright and mine it for its data to be used for AI. And that isn't something we wanted to happen, something we fought against. And the government did eventually abandon allowing that data mining as an exemption, which is very good. And the widespread press coverage comes about because the press do believe that we're sort of experts in this field, as we are ahead of the game in many of the cases. So that's been a success. So what can you do to protect yourself? Well, Equity's actually got a very good AI toolkit on its website, so equity.org.uk, so it helps you understand what the technologies are and gives you sample contracts and templates to use, and some details about knowing your rights. So these are the clauses. So if you're being engaged by somebody to do some work and they're giving you, a brief contract, you can get them to add these clauses to it, so that they know, they're clear, they're not allowed to use your intellectual property for artificial intelligence. I mean, the contract, if it doesn't mention AI, does effectively say you're not allowed to do these things, and that's like an implied term, but these just make it more clear that they're definitely not allowed to do it. It's there in black and white and they can't ignore it. So this is for people who do want to do work in AI. So it sets a framework so you can actually lay out what you're wanting to do and all the uses of it and all the purposes of it and everything. So you can download this and fill in all those details. Then it's absolutely clear what they're using the work for and that they can't go beyond that. Right, so when it comes down to it, we do still want improved performers' rights on this, so there may come a time when we want more work from members to lobby MPs and things like that, and contact us for more information if you need it. So the SAG-AFTRA thing, Claire covered quite well. So I mean, both disputes we were supporting effectively, although we couldn't go on strike ourselves because there's laws that prevent us doing that. As it came down to it, our members didn't need to cross any of the American picket lines anyway, because all the studios shut down. Anyone that had that was run by an American or had any American cast members, they just shut down. But the Writers Guild, they settled after, I think, 150 days or something like that. But it's very clear that they don't want their work to be used to feed AI to generate other content, and that work created by a computer can't be treated the same way as that written by a human. For the actors, the threat was seen as more imminent. I mean, so far, the written work has turned out not to be that creative. It can't really replace proper written content. It hasn't got the sort of ingenuity and authenticity. So replacing writers is seen as much harder. But the actors, obviously, if you've got clips of their performances, you can use them for other things. And within the agreement that they made when they settled, which was a couple of months after the writers, I think. So there's terms in the contract for things they can use AI for. So if you're employed to do a production, they can use AI to do certain things without getting your consent. But this would just be to do with that production. So if they need to do a scene slightly differently or something like that, they can do that. If it's something that's being created independent of that, of an employment situation, then they always have to get your consent before they can do it. And yeah, Claire mentioned the background actors thing. I mean, that's probably been going on anyway, really, from CGI for quite a long time. But it's clear that they don't want digital actors to replace the jobs of background actors. So Equity's future negotiations, well, when our agreements were last written with the major television and film companies, they didn't really envisage AI. They haven't got AI written into them, but we're going to be negotiating them over the coming years, and they're all going to have to be compliant for AI going forward. We've now got a network of supporting artists. I think they see themselves as being more threatened than the standard actors, and will fight for their jobs, basically. And okay, that's it for me. So yeah, we can both of us take questions now if you need to. Does everybody understand that okay?
Yeah, so does anyone, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, but also completely horrifying. And you say that, AI isn't a threat to comedy, that it's only capable of simple jokes and puns. Have you seen the George Carlin set?
No, what was this?
Right, okay, so the work of the American comedian George Carlin, they've done basically what they've done for music. So, for example, they'll take Frank Sinatra and everything they know about his back catalogue,
Yeah.
and then they'll get him to sing a song that was after his time. So, Gangster's Paradise, for example.
Yeah.
And you've got Freddie Mercury doing Thriller.
Yeah.
And what they did was that they got the AI to study the work, the routines. I mean, this could happen, for example, to Stuart Lee. I don't know if it's because he's passed, but the estate are actually suing the creators of that. So it's a real test case.
Yeah.
So that's really worrying. I suppose my thought is simply this. I don't know why this is happening. Is there anything we can do to stop it? To stop the rise of the robots and opt out in a way?
I wish we could. Once something.
It's resistance future.
Yeah, once something's been invented, you can't uninvent it. All you can do is legislate and try and regulate it. But yeah, because at the moment it's not that great for doing comedy. But as you said, these things are developing to be able to do that. I mean, I suppose the Beatles thing that they released just before Christmas was an example of good AI use. I don't know, and they talked about doing things with Elvis, and obviously, ABBA could replicate their show all over the world, the one that they've got, the Voyage one. All that is all good stuff. But yeah, we don't want it to take away the real experience of live performance. We'll be fighting against it as much as we can. And we may need the help of performers as we're doing that. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I hadn't seen the George Carlin, and I think that's probably my impression that is the biggest threat, is where there's a lot of material that they can use as a basis. I think there's I guess with someone like George Carlin who has passed, it has an extra resonance because obviously there is a limited amount of material just by the nature of the fact that he's no longer here. So I think that becomes an even more ethically murky world, because obviously the estate, as you were saying, I don't want that, but then there, is there an appetite from fans for kind of more, and then that becomes something that I guess in terms of intellectual property, it becomes an even bigger kind of challenge to think about how you protect that property from people that themselves can't kind of counter any longer. Yes, yeah, and it's even more murky because there are some instances where the estates of the performers themselves are kind of involved. So then, I'm thinking in the music industry, for example, the kind of use of holograms and things like that. So it becomes, I think it's interesting, but as you said, quite terrifying as well. Yep.
You said about that AI can be a useful kind of start point for creativity, and you were saying about writers reserving the right to use those tools themselves. Have you heard of any comedians who have something happened in Catherine Ryan's life, and she goes to ChatGPT and says, write me a routine in the style of Catherine Ryan about that, and uses it just
Can be done. I think one example my colleague gave was somebody called Jimmy Kimmel, who was using AI created material on his set. And I've heard of writers using it, novel writers using it just to help them along with a scenario that, say, if they just need an idea, how would a detective escape from being locked in a shed or something like that? Just things like that, where you put that into ChatGPT and then you just think, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'll use that in the book. So it's helpful from that way, but yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be a replacement, but I think there's likely to be more sort of court cases and things come up about this in the future, particularly in America, so you know, we'll keep an eye on everything. Any more questions, anyone?
Just going to say about the George Carlin thing, his daughter said, she said that because it was all original material that was generated, they trained the AI to generate material, she said some of the jokes sounded like something he might have said, so that was from his daughter, so that was
Yeah, and they were new jokes.
Yeah, it was completely new material, they just fed all these, probably hundreds of routines, they fed it in and it learned how to do as well.
It is worrying, has to be said.
I'm refusing to watch it because I want to
No, I've not seen it. I'm curious now, but yeah, I don't think I'd like it. Okay. Yes.
On that note, is there anything that non-performers can do to keep performers performing and to, you know, as a backlash against this sort of thing?
Well, yeah, it might be that we need the help of the general public as well with our campaigns. So, yes, I don't know how we would get, you know, maybe signing petitions and things if they're out there, then maybe that sort of thing. Yeah, we often use that. So, yeah.
You've got some journalists take it, get on the court action. I can't remember. There's a couple of newspapers, isn't there? New York Times, somebody like that. Similar thing with the concern of them written journalistic pieces are being used to train them being used
Yes.
to write further journalistic pieces. So I don't know.
Yes, they probably, I mean, if that's in America, they probably need to get their equivalent of the NUJ to stop them allowing the feeding in of their work into the AI engines to use it. I don't know what the NUJ in the UK is doing about that. I'll have to find out.
I think a really basic thing is to support live comedy, like, because I think that's the one thing that for, you know, obviously George Carlin notwithstanding, you know, I think as Michael was saying, it's quite difficult to kind of generate whole routines out of nothing still. So kind of, yeah, supporting live comedy is really important, especially when people are using social media so much, because obviously, as I was saying, that is a really useful tool to get your kind of work out there into the world, but it's not going to be income generating. And I think the risk is that we use kind of social media in particular in the similar way that in similar way that during the pandemic, when there was a lot of online comedy, that didn't seem to kind of come through, that just because it was online didn't mean that it wasn't something that people should be paid for. So people were making, you know, reports found that people were making much less money than they were from performing in person. So I think that is, for me, that would be the big thing, is to continue supporting live comedy and to kind of take what you might see online and to actually see the people in person. But I think, yeah, and if you do see things that are being shared on things like joke aggregators, kind of reporting it for copy, often the platforms will allow you to kind of report it and say that there's kind of copyright infringement there. But it's tricky, I think. Yeah.
I mean, in relation to the joke about I'm wondering if there's more with social media.
Yeah.
Like, it seems they've got the priorities completely wrong. I know I sound a bit like a conspiracy theorist speaking out of turn, but it's very real.
Yeah.
And the problem is when the bigger acts maybe take material from
Yeah.
the lesser ones, use it in their routine.
Yeah.
And then that means that the comedians that invented it can no longer use those jokes because they're associated with the bigger name.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Toast.
there's been recent cases as well, not necessarily related purely to online comedy, but and I can't remember which way around it was, but the comedian Kay Kurd was sued by someone, or sued someone for libel because he accused him of stealing his joke. and then that became a kind of whole thing. So there is kind of precedence of things happening in the legal space. But as I said, historically, a lot of this has been self-policed amongst kind of comedians in the same scene. Obviously, a lot of these big kind of joke aggregators just don't care. Like they just and there's no incentive for social media sites either, because obviously if they take the video down, then they're losing views as well. So I think this is a problem. There's very little incentive beyond the moral incentive for people to actually do anything, and you know, often that is not enough of a incentive for people to change, unfortunately.
Originality and creativity, isn't it? And everything's just shared. There's
Yeah.
things like dad jokes just getting published, just completely anonymous, like harvested from
Yeah, and I mean, I will.
original efforts.
Without wanting to sound too kind of doom and gloom, I think there are some examples where, especially social media, is actually created quite a lot of quite interesting new kind of forms of comedy. So you see a lot more sketch, for example, because people are able to do that kind of at home by themselves and create things. And so I think there are potential there, but I think as with everything, you know, I think you have to take it within the context of protecting yourself as well and protecting your own kind of work, whilst also acknowledging that there are opportunities there as well.
What's a joke aggregator?
It's like a site that just picks up jokes and shares them on their own site. So I should have explained that. You see it a lot on social media sites like TikTok, where you'll see like they'll take it and then they'll kind of put it in their feed, but they often won't credit it properly, so you don't really know where it's come from. So it'll just be like kind of, you know, kind of out of its context. So you get that quite a lot as a way to kind of, so they get content from it, and then, you know, they don't have to actually do anything other than put it in their feed. So you get that quite a lot. Yeah, you get that a lot with, especially with TV specials, for example, which again is kind of quite, there's often intellectual property issues with that as well. You'll often get that in TikTok in general with like film and TV. So that there's a trend on like TikTok to show like scenes from existing film and television programs in like parts, and it's really like bizarre, but kind of I think there's probably some research to be done about whether or not people go and watch the actual thing after seeing that, because my impression is they probably don't. But yeah.
They do side-by-side comparison. What is the best way, sorry if this is already touched on, for a creative to protect their output?
Yeah, I'll hand this over to the union.
Well, I mean, if you're producing it under a contract, then, you know, put clauses in that protects it. But I mean, once you start putting stuff online of your own content, you're really just sort of saying it's there, anybody can scrape it, anybody can use it. You've just, you know, just got to be careful about what you put out there, really. I mean, I was talking to our recorded media department about that. Is there anything further that anyone can do who puts a lot of stuff online? And there isn't really at the moment. It can just be grabbed by anyone. It is protected by copyright, but people breach copyright. That's the thing. And what do you do about it if they're in a foreign territory? You know, what do you do about it? So, you know, can do your cease and desist letter, but you know.
The timestamp on the tweet.
Yeah, you can put your copyright symbol on things. Yeah, I mean, just to make it plain that it does belong to you. But yeah, if you're not acting under a contract, you're just making it available to potentially people out there that are going to steal it from you. So don't put your best stuff out there.
It's a dilemma, isn't it? Because people want the exposure.
You want enough for them to.
They want the profile.
Yeah, you want enough.
At the same time.
Enough to get people interested, but not to give away everything. I mean, jokes have always been stolen. I mean, Claire says there, long before AI and the internet and everything, you know, people were stealing each other's jokes. But a joke in itself can't be copyrighted. It's too insignificant. And also lots of people come up with the same idea at the same time, or slightly different variations on the same theme. And often it's difficult to prove the actual origin of a particular joke. But, you know, because I've been running Equities Comedians Network for quite a while, there were names mentioned of people who do it on a kind of like a blatant sort of scale, that they just steal other people's material. I won't mention any names. I can't remember any, but there were people, there were comedians out there who made it, yeah, who did just, that's what they did. They stole other people's jokes and they were known for it. But with everybody else, they would try and avoid doing that and create their own material. So, you know, AI and the internet just makes these things easier to do. But I suppose in the past that comedian would have gone to see lots of shows and sat there with a notebook. So, you know. Yeah, okay. Oh, yes. Yeah.
That's a series of lectures in its own right.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
So why is a song tune more significant than a joke?
I mean, a joke can be kind of like 10 words or something, can't it? That's the thing.
But what if it was a long joke?
Well, if it was a whole song would be protected. The lyrics of a song.
I watch a lot of Indian films, and quite often they'll steal the tune and change a few notes so that they don't
Yeah.
get done for copyright.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people can do. But so if you steal a joke and you don't change any of the words, surely that's significant.
It depends how long the joke was, I suppose. If the joke was, you know, 300 words long about something that happened in a supermarket or something like that. But if it's just, you know, take my wife, she's a stunner or something, you know, she works down the abattoir, you know, something like that, that couldn't really be attributed to anybody particularly. It's just out there. Anyone can tell that to anyone else. I think it was Bob Monkhouse, though, to be honest. Right.
We have another question. No. I feel like I need to come up with a joke so that we've not just...
Oh, go on then.
Absolutely not. It's the worst thing in the world when you've done any comedy and someone asks you, tell us a joke then, and then there's just nothing. Thank you. So we are finishing a bit early. Apologies for that, but I think we have had an interesting discussion, and I can only speak for myself, but I think we'll be around, so if people have got questions that they do want to ask in front of everyone, then they can certainly do that. So thank you so much for coming. I will say that I said to my friend Jilly when I was like, oh, you might be the only person here. So you have massively, you've massively, my expectations were much, much lower than the turnout. So thank you so much for coming and to listen to us talk about AI on a Sunday afternoon. And obviously lots of really interesting things that Equity is doing as a union. And for any comedians in the audience, obviously the Comedians Network and the Comedians Charter have been doing really important work around supporting comedians. So you should definitely have a look at the work that Equity's been doing. But yeah, thank you so much, and we'll let you go.